Well, welcome. I was giggling away at the chat. Welcome everyone to this webinar on why and how business should contribute to COP16. My name is Eva Zabe. I'm the CEO of Business for Nature, and it's my absolute pleasure to host today's webinar. So a very warm welcome. It's fantastic to see so many of you already on the line. Thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing such funny suggestions on what the monkey is whispering. For your information, these are cotton top tamarin. They're found exclusively in tropical forest edges in northwestern Colombia. But sadly, these monkeys are critically endangered. They've lost 98% of their habitat. So a tangible reason and example of why we're all here now and why we all need to act. So indeed, algo está cambiando. My Spanish is a little bit rusty, but something is changing. We're entering the implementation phase of the Global Biodiversity Framework, otherwise known as the Biodiversity Plan, and this is not the time to slow down. We'll do our very best on today's webinar to avoid using too much jargon and acronyms. There are two exceptions. One is the UN CBD, which stands for the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, and COP16, which is the 16th Conference of the Parties, where governments come together, negotiate, and that's also where they'll check in on the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, otherwise known as the Biodiversity Plan. We'll cover quite a bit on today's call. Over the next hour, we will cover the following agenda, and then we'll have 30 minutes for Q&A. It will be really helpful if you have questions to please put them in the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. But we'd also love to continue this exchange in the chat for comments or reactions. And so please do use that chat function as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to present why it's important for you as companies, as financial institutions, and as organizations working with them to engage ahead of and also during COP16. We're going to look at what's expected, how will we drive a collective message to governments through our COP16 business statement. We will then also hear about Kering's experience delivering concrete action through a nature strategy. And that will be a conversation between Julian from WBCSD and Rachel from Kering, who are both also on the line. And then finally, and yes, we're going to make you hang on and hang in on this webinar until then. We will share with you all the latest insights and intel that we have about business participation on the ground at COP16. We're still continuing to gather as much information as possible. We'll share this with you, and then also how you can express your interest to participate. So I hope that all sounds really good to you. Hopefully it will be valuable. And just before we jump into all of this exciting content, I wanted to introduce Business for Nature. For those who may not be aware, we're a global coalition of over 98 business organizations and some of the leading NGOs. So very close to the 100 milestone, which is exciting. And together, we work with the coalitions and with many, many businesses and financial institutions to demonstrate business leadership and momentum with the mission to drive credible business action and policy ambition to achieve a nature positive economy for all by 2030. You can see the loop on this slide. On the right-hand side, we know thousands of companies are making commitments and taking actions in different ways to help protect, restore, and sustainably use natural resources, but it's just not cutting it. The voluntary action is simply not enough. If we want to seriously scale and speed up action, we also need ambitious policy that in turn will drive even more business action. So let's just go down memory lane for a quick moment and think about COP15. Some of you might have been there. It would be great to reconnect. Some of you may have heard. So at the end of 2022 in Montreal, COP15 was a really historic moment. Our collective business voice with all of our coalition, all of our partners, so many businesses and finances came together to give governments the courage to adopt really strong targets. And it was such a historic moment. So we have Now, just as the Paris Agreement gave the world a roadmap on climate action, the Biodiversity Plan, which was adopted at COP15, has set out the roadmap for ambitious nature action. And it was super important because that united and leading business voice was absolutely critical to influence the Biodiversity Plan. And just as businesses were key to influencing the agreement itself, even more so, business and finance have a critical role to help implement it. And so today you are all key players in implementing the plan successfully. And that's why we will also focus on business action and the strategies that companies can develop and publish and implement for nature. In October this year, now we're going to look at COP16, governments, NGOs, civil society, local communities, many more parts of society will all come together in Cali in Colombia to discuss how we will make peace with nature, how we will be making progress to reach the 23 targets of the Biodiversity Plan, and which has the overall mission of a nature positive world by 2030 to halt and reverse nature loss. The COP16's theme, therefore, is peace for nature, peace with nature, through which the Colombian presidency has really called on an improvement of the relationship of the current economic model and the environment. The conference has also a number of elements to keep in mind as you engage in this process. It's been labeled as the People's COP. It's encouraging the representation of all parts of society, in particular youth, women, and indigenous peoples and local communities. COP16 will also emphasize the recognition of the interconnectedness between the nature and climate crises, and it will also encourage a regional convergence to address these challenges. Finally, a really big focus of the COP, and you'll hear a lot about this, will be the publication of governments' national biodiversity strategies and action plans, these NBSAPs, National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, that are aligned with the Biodiversity Plan. They need to publish these before or during COP16. Well, what will the governments actually be negotiating? COP16 is going to be really important. It's the first check-in point, the first major global milestone since the adoption of the Biodiversity Plan. And governments will be reviewing the progress made to implement the plan, and they'll be focused on three key things. One is monitoring the implementation progress. How do the countries determine how they should be setting the indicators for each target, and can there be agreement on that? The second is financing for implementation. We know that there's a huge finance gap to be closed for the right level of action to take place. And we need to ensure that the right financial resources are available to implement the plan. And the third is access and benefit sharing. Here there'll be a push to finalize a multilateral mechanism, and that also will include the digital sequencing of information, which is really a challenging but super important to negotiate and then to get right to be able to move forward. So with this, we're going to kick off with, first of all, a short message that we've very kindly received from Bianca Brazil from the CBD Secretariat on why it's important, why COP16 is important for business and vice versa. So let's hear from Bianca.
Hello to all. My name is Bianca Brazil, and I'm the Program Manager for Business Engagement and Mainstreaming at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. I want to begin by thanking Business for Nature team for this kind invitation to join you today. In 2022, at the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties that took place in Montreal, we witnessed the adoption of a historical global agreement, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or the Biodiversity Plan for Life on Earth, as it became known. This ambitious framework has a vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050 and a mission of halting biodiversity loss by 2030. As we prepare for the convention's COP16 in Cali, Colombia, governments are updating their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, or NBSAPs, and translating the global targets of the Biodiversity Plan into national targets, developing policies and actions to achieve them. COP16 will be a pivotal moment, and all efforts will be focusing on understanding what has been done so far and what tools and solutions have been made available, and what are the existing gaps that we need to urgently address to ensure that we will be able to successfully deliver on all the goals and target sets for 2030. As for the business and finance sectors, we hope to have the opportunity to learn how businesses have been addressing and internalizing the goals and targets into their strategies and business models, what progress has been made so far, and what are the key challenges and gaps hindering progress. A number of opportunities for exchange and learning will be available, and while the nitty-gritty details are still being finalized, I can share with you that we'll have a few outlets at COP16 available. The Blue Zone, which is on site, will feature the sixth edition of the Business and Biodiversity Forum that is scheduled to take place on October 27th. The second edition of the Finance and Biodiversity Day will take place on October 28th, and a dedicated hub for business and finance that would have capacity for events up to 25 participants will run for the duration of COP in the multi-stakeholder space. There are also open opportunities for side events to be organized by different organizations, and we will also launch a new pavilion this year, the GBF Pavilion, which will feature thematic days. While the agenda hasn't been finalized yet, I'm excited to share at least a few of the confirmed thematic days that will certainly be of interest. The Trade Day will focus on understanding how can trade policies and measures support biodiversity conservation, its sustainable use, and the sharing of benefits arising from the use of genetic resources. The Food Day will focus on the transformation of food systems for the people and for the planet. The Sustainable Oceans Day will be looking into how to ensure our oceans are conserved while supporting sustainable development, livelihoods, and the energy transition. This and many other themes will be featured and centralized in the GBF Pavilion. The government of Colombia is also designing a green zone with a number of exciting activities focusing on green businesses, capacity building, and much more. These activities will be carried out at a different location in the central area of Cali, but will be interconnected with all the activities taking place in Blue Zone. The details are still being finalized, but we hope to be able to have detailed information available soon. We are also very excited with the announcement of Bloom 24, which will take place at the Green Zone on October 24th and 25th. We welcome this initiative, and we hope that this will provide for an opportunity for more dialogue space and sharing of experiences that will complement all the efforts that were taking place within the Blue Zone. I know Business for Nature is one of the partners in this event, and I'm convinced this will be a great success. The successful achievement of the Biodiversity Plan and its goals and targets relies on the whole of society and whole of government approaches. We can only succeed if we work in collaboration, and governments need to be looking into regulation, legislation, and measures to tackle all the targets while also making every effort to ensure that the necessary enabling conditions are in place. Business and finance sectors need to quickly understand the relationship with biodiversity and to transform their business models to reduce impacts of their activities. The finance sector needs also to look into greening their portfolios and developing financing that is sustainable and aligned with the Biodiversity Plan. I think we can all say the COP16 will be very exciting, and it is being noted as the implementation COP. I thank again Business for Nature for their continued support in raising awareness about the importance of nature and biodiversity, for their efforts in supporting businesses with guidance and tools that can help provide private sector to be part of the solution, and for their engagement and their continued collaboration over the years. I look forward to welcoming you all to Cali in October, and I wish you all a very, very successful event today. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Bianca, for that video message. And I'm sorry that perhaps some of the audio wasn't so clear for some of you, but really clear direction there in terms of need for collaboration, need for business and finance. So let's hear from all of you now. We'd love to know how high COP16 is on your agenda and on your company's radar. So a bunch of you are filling that in already. So you can see the options on the screen, whether it's all the way from it's one of your priority events to it's still quite low or I don't know. We'll come back to the results of that. So please do continue to answer the poll. And we will smoothly go into the next part of this webinar, which is about the key business initiatives to support. And the first piece is going to be how about supporting our collective message to governments. Now, there are 3 ways that we've identified right now that you can get ready to engage in COP16. There's on the policy side, you need to, you can support our collective message to governments before COP16. The second is by delivering action through nature strategies, and Bianca also raised that. And finally, 3, by expressing your interest in participating in COP16. I should add that Bianca mentioned a few dates and a few events. Michael, at the end of this call, will come back to all of those dates that Bianca mentioned in a nicer slide with the key moments for you to participate at COP16. So please don't worry if you didn't note those down straight away. So we're now going to go through each of these 3 ways that you can engage in more detail. And to begin with, I'm going to hand over to my wonderful colleague, Lucy Coast, who's our communications director, to take us through how businesses can support our message to governments. Over to you, Lucy.
Thank you so much, Eva. And just to set out the context for those that are fairly new to the policy agenda on nature, COP15 and the adoption of the Biodiversity Plan really has created policy momentum on nature. So that's really good news. But this is a story of 2 halves. And over the last few years, we've seen some very encouraging policy developments globally, sending the right signals to businesses that they need to put nature higher up their agenda. However, at the same time, we've got in some geographies and on some topics, we have seen ambition levels being diluted. But I'd like to start with the positives first. So as Eva's already articulated, one of the key expectations at COP16 is for governments to update and publish their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And these are one of the main tools really to help countries and governments with their national biodiversity planning. And so far, 8 countries have submitted their plans, including Japan, Luxembourg, Hungary, Malaysia, China, Ireland, Spain, and France. We're expecting many more to be published over the next couple of months, including the UK, India, and Mexico. And many others will submit theirs during COP16. And these plans are going to be really helpful for businesses to start to build a picture for the national context for them, the targets and the level of ambition that governments are setting. And several plans have already very clearly outlined the expectation and role of business. Another positive to mention is around one of the most relevant targets in the Biodiversity Plan for business and finance. For those of you that know Business for Nature, this Target 15 and the role of business and finance is something we've been following very closely. Target 15 commits governments to require the private sector to assess and disclose their nature-related risks, impacts, and dependencies. And this target is already being supported in a number of regions. Europe in particular has been leading the way with the adoption of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and also the more recently approved Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. And so that first piece of legislation does set out quite important rules for big companies, including those that are not headquartered in the EU and listed SMEs, to assess and report their impacts on nature starting next year. And the more recent due diligence directive that will come into effect in a couple of years and will require companies to carry out due diligence across their operations and value chains to prevent corporate abuses on the environment. And there's great progress outside Europe too, in Asia. Some of you may have seen the news from earlier this year. So China's 3 largest stock exchanges announced mandatory disclosure requirements for at least 450 of the country's largest listed companies. And also the Japanese National Biodiversity Plan strongly encourages companies to start making nature disclosures. So some really positive signs there. And there have been some other interesting and really important key pieces of legislation coming out in other parts of the world too. So Canada, for example, they've just got a new federal plastics registry. There's the UK's biodiversity net gain policy, Australia's nature repair market, just to name a few, and that list is definitely not exhaustive. So all very encouraging. However, and maybe we need some sort of drumbeat or apocalyptic music to play here, we are also seeing some major setbacks on nature policy, and overall development is too slow. So for instance, Target 18 of the Biodiversity Plan committed governments to reforming environmentally harmful subsidies, and it's fair to say that the progress being made on this is not enough. Most of the published national biodiversity plans have recognised the importance of environmentally harmful subsidies, but are not doing enough from what we've seen to really incorporate concrete targets or actions to address it. And unsurprisingly, our conversations with governments show that there's a lot of confusion about this issue on where to start and the action needed to address this sort of quite complex reform process. There are some governments who are starting to think about this issue. So the Netherlands, for example, has started to do they've done a baseline analysis of harmful subsidies within the Netherlands, but this example is the exception rather than the norm. And in parallel around the world, we are also seeing progressive environmental policies being weakened, delayed, or cancelled altogether. And an example being the Nature Restoration Law, which some of you might be familiar with. And that's why we need all of you really to step up, make your voices heard, and continue to influence governments to be more ambitious. And so really the message is the pace has been too slow to generate the transformation that we need. Government action is really needed now to strengthen the policies and legislation that are going to drive the necessary action to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030, which is the mission at the heart of the Biodiversity Plan. And that's why we really need a strong and united business voice that supports that momentum and calls for greater government leadership. So how do we need your support? 100 days before the start of COP16 on the 11th of July, we are going to launch the COP16 business statement demonstrating renewed support for ambitious nature policies. Hopefully this will be on some of your radars already. The statement will be published alongside some more detailed recommendations developed by Business for Nature to governments. We are inviting all businesses and financial institutions to add their voice and endorse this statement. We know that there is no single company, organization, or individual that can solve this crisis alone. We need this sort of joint collective effort, and we need strong government leadership to change the rules of the game. We are pleased to also share that many companies have already endorsed the statement. We've had some coming in just today, the likes of Unilever, Wipro, Mahindra, L'Occitane, International Paper, Givaudan. We even had some live endorsements on this morning's webinar, and we hope that will encourage more of you to join this group of leading businesses and financial institutions. The deadline for signatories and endorsers is the 26th of June. You can scan the QR code here, and my colleague has, I think, kindly popped it in the chat. And then just very sort of the final thing I wanted to mention is, as you will see in the statement, we've outlined 5 high-level policy recommendations to support implementation of the Biodiversity Plan. I won't go through all of these in detail, but just very quickly go through those 5. So the first is around making sure business and finance protect nature and restore degraded ecosystems. The second is all around sustainable resource use and management. The third is around valuing and embedding nature in decision-making and disclosure. The next one is all around finance, aligning financial flows to ensure that we can transition to a more sustainable economy. And the final one is all around adopting and strengthening other global agreements to address nature loss, for example, the Global Plastics Treaty, or, and the deep sea mining moratorium. Okay, so that's sort of the summary from me of what we're calling on governments to do. And I suppose my final message really is the participation of the private sector is absolutely critical now more than ever. We would argue, to really help drive that change and achieve a nature positive and livable world for 2030 by 2030. So really hope we can count on your support. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lucy. And yes, so that was the piece about all of you being able to contribute to calling for policy ambition. And now we're going to dive into the second way that you can get ready for COP16, which is around taking action and developing a nature strategy. For this, I'm delighted to invite our dear partner, Julian Hill-Landolt from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, to facilitate this exchange. Over to you, Julian.
Thanks, Eva. I hope everyone can hear me okay. It's a pleasure to be here. As Eva says, I'm at the WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and I'm responsible for the work that we do with around 70 of our 230 members, specifically on nature, of which I'm delighted to say Kering is one. And we're here to talk firstly about this It's Now for Nature campaign, and then to hear a little bit about how Kering's actually going about its own nature action journey. So you see here on the screen, where is nature in your business strategy? And that's really the founding question to this campaign. But the campaign itself actually began with a question on our side for Business for Nature and its partners to answer, which was, how can we drive and demonstrate business commitment and action to halt and reverse nature loss? And so It's Now for Nature is really our answer to that. It's a joint global campaign that encourages businesses and financial institutions to develop and publish a nature strategy. It's supported by what we call the Nature Strategy Handbook. And really what you need to understand about this campaign is that we're trying to help companies and financial institutions build and create their nature strategies, but then also demonstrate how they're supporting the implementation of the GBF, or the Biodiversity Plan, as it's become known. It was developed in collaboration with PwC UK, and basically the Nature Strategy Handbook, which is the resource that will guide you through this process, provides you with a practical guide to support any business in developing a nature strategy. It provides a set of guiding questions, recommendations, and resources for how to develop a strategy for nature. And it builds on the ACT-D framework, an acronym that, if you don't know it, stands for Assess, Commit, Transform, and Disclose. These are basically the high-level actions, business actions that companies should take to drive forward a nature journey. A few weeks ago, on International Biodiversity Day, the first of 5 nature strategies were published on the Now for Nature website, sending a strong signal of the growing momentum on nature and encouraging more businesses to step up their actions to halt and reverse nature loss. With these strategies, these first 5 that we've published, the companies have clearly articulated how they're going to address their most material impacts and dependencies, meeting the requirements of It's Now for Nature. So as a reminder, for those of you who are on the call who aren't yet familiar with this campaign, what we ask is that you follow the strategy, that you develop a strategy, and then that you submit a strategy for us to feature as part of the campaign and demonstrate that implementation of the GBF. And what we're looking for those strategies that have been featured are these 4 minimum requirements: that you've performed a materiality assessment to identify your material impacts, dependencies, risks, and opportunities; that you've then identified smart targets that are aligned with those material impacts, dependencies, risks, and opportunities; that you've got clear actions linked to those smart targets to achieve them, and in particular to avoid and reduce negative impacts on nature based on those, again, material impacts, dependencies, risks, and opportunities; and lastly, that you have C-suite or board approval of the strategy and responsibility for its delivery. So we really encourage all businesses to take a look at the website, go download the handbook, and begin to take action now, so that over the next few years, we can grow the number of companies demonstrating their implementation of the GBF. So with that very short introduction, let's now move straight to hearing from a company who's actually done this. Kering. Kering is a company representing some of the biggest luxury brands in the world, and they are amongst the first 5 companies whose nature strategies have been reviewed and accepted as part of the Now for Nature campaign. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to welcome Rachel to talk to us today. Rachel, if you turn your camera on and unmute yourself, perfect, there you are. Lovely to see you today, and let's just kick straight off with a question for you around this long-term thinking that Kering's been putting into its dependence on nature. You've been looking at it for longer than almost any other big global company. Can you just tell us a little bit about Kering and why nature is so important for your business?
Yeah, with pleasure, and I'm really delighted to be here, so thank you. The fact of the matter is that all of our raw materials, which are the basis of all of our products, come from nature. And so the dependency is actually quite clear. Excuse me, there's people walking behind me, they'll leave very quickly. And so the clarity of nature being so, let's say, pivotal for our activities. Back in 2012, we started thinking about, well, what really is our impact and dependency on nature. So we looked at land, water, greenhouse gases, and we started what's called our environmental profit and loss, so EP&L, which is actually accessible on our website with all of the data points year in and year after, in order to have a sense of where are we really having that impact, and how can we make a change so that we can actually improve that impact. And if for a longest time we were on this idea of trying to reduce, we actually are also moving into now how can we contribute. And so in 2020, when we were looking at this EP&L and thinking along the lines of all the new international conversation, we realized that if we take our land footprint in the world, which comes to about 350,000 hectares, what would we need to do in order to be nature positive? And so we started working on our 2020 biodiversity strategy. And we came up with the idea that we needed to both help protect 1 million hectares by 2025 in hotspots that are critical for the ecosystems that are outside of our value chains. And we had to help regenerate 1 million hectares within our value chains, mainly through regenerative agricultural approaches. And this actually is quite aligned with what the expectation is, because as you can hear, we're doing 6 times our footprint in order to be sure that we actually have the kind of impact that you need to have. It's therefore quite aligned, or even above and beyond, the 30 by 30 principle put out in COP15. And we're going to keep moving that way because we see that actually when it comes to having these parts, it's not just about checking off the dots and trying to show everybody that we're complying. No, we're actually seeing how can we make our business more sustainable. And so what is the nature part there, and how do we act for that?
Amazing. And if we have time, I'm going to come back to that incredible ambition at the end. But you just talked about ticking off the dots, and I think it's worth, even though that's the boring nitty-gritty side of this, and apologies to anyone who's working on this. I don't really mean that it's boring, but you had your first EP&L in 2012. A lot has changed since then. Back then, you were absolutely miles ahead of the pack. Now we've got the Biodiversity Plan, we've got SPTM, we've got TNFD. Can you just talk a little bit about how your journey has evolved over time, what some of the main, biggest things that you've learned have been, and then also how this evolution of the nature landscape has affected the way that you think about your own nature strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of these frameworks are always so helpful. They become leverage, both in terms of having everybody speak the same language, using that as a way of forcing change managements, because it becomes then things that we might become obvious for many different teams in different aspects. It gives a certain amount of, let's say, healthy pressure for us to be able to move forward on those different things. And I would say that, yeah, some of the critical moments have been within global frameworks, but also then sometimes within coalition frameworks. So all the work that we've been doing with WBCSD and OP2B, One Planet Business for Biodiversity, has helped really frame what is regenerative agriculture, what are we talking about, and why should we do it? And then in being one of the piloting companies, one of the 17 piloting companies for the SBTN, we've also actually been enjoying how the nexus is starting to come together. And so we can really, when we talk about nature positive, we're not just going to keep lining up different things, greenhouse gases, water quantity, water quality, biodiversity, land, etc. We're actually starting to make a more holistic, comprehensive movement. So doing the pilot with SBTN has been really useful for us to start bringing water into a higher level as part of the nature piece that we're looking at. And so that gets me to the real answer to your question, is that all of these ticking off the box has actually given us a certain amount of rigor and let's say reassurance in terms of the science behind it, so that we're really sure about how we're moving forward properly. That coupled with the extreme catastrophes that we're seeing all the time, where everybody is starting to see that at the forefront. They're living it day to day. Why am I still wearing my winter coat mid-June in France? You know, there's these things that are going on where people are starting to realize that this is actually not just about reputation. This is actually about business resilience, and how are we sure that we'll be able to still keep operating? And so I think that the ticking off the boxes are a way of getting everybody around the same words to understand this true resilience piece that is so critical for us all.
Okay, so if people remember anything from this call, it's rigor, reassurance, and resilience. Pretty good.
Yes.
3 hours. Well done. Love alliteration.
And maybe we can just add to it a strategic approach.
Because okay, I'm going to find an R for that.
Yeah, okay, right. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I just, I think that too often we do fall into then the technicity of things, and people get, and companies mainly, get overwhelmed when they see all of these frameworks coming out. They think, I don't have the human resources, I don't have the budget, this is going to be too complicated, I don't have enough data, how am I going to do it? And it seems like it's too much to take on all at once. And so I would say we need to be strategic about it. Just as I mentioned, we have understood how nature is at the basis of our business. And so then we know why and where we need to act. And that then we can explain it to the main stakeholders in terms of how do we need to move forward concretely and to have an actual impact, and a lasting impact, positive impact. And so I think, just as you say, we have to bridge the boxes to the actual strategic part of what is material and pertinent for me. And that's how then all of the business leaders within the company can also get on board and move forward.
So maybe this is the right point to go back to that level of ambition. You've mentioned tying it to the strategic approach. You just listed off a bunch of the challenges that one could face. And you've also got this incredibly high ambition of 6 times your land footprint to address, which will obviously come with quite significant costs. That's not going to be free to the company. You're going to have to invest in that massively in a number of different ways. So I wonder if you can give some examples of maybe some of the challenges that you may have faced when trying to push through that level of ambition, and how you did tie it back to a strategic approach for the company.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I think I sort of mentioned one of the challenges, which is sometimes it feels like it's a pile-on of just another demand. And especially for the companies within our company. So as we're trying to build it all forward, sometimes it just really feels like it's too much. And I think actually probably everyone here today have already lived with this kind of, I'm still figuring out climate, don't talk to me about nature yet, kind of difficulty. But But the way that we're getting around it is actually trying to make it better understood how it is all one piece of the same puzzle. And that actually, for example, if you are as agriculturally based as we are, the fact that you're going to start regenerating lands is what's actually going to enable you to reduce the greenhouse gases. They're actually going to fit together. And so if then, instead of having, as we say in French, a millefeuille, where you just have lined up this stacking of just too many asks, and you do it instead as, let's say, poupée russe, one of these Russian dolls, where actually you see how each thing is fitting in with the rest, and it's actually all helping it move forward, then that's how we can actually make it seem almost like a no-brainer. And so an obvious way forward.
Amazing. Super insightful. So I'm hoping that the Business for Nature team gives us a few more minutes, because they started 3 minutes late, or they let us start 3 minutes late again. So I'm going to try for 2 more questions and hope we get away with it. So one question I really wanted to ask was, obviously you've been at this for, as I said at the beginning, much longer than most. You already had your strategy in place before this campaign was launched. I'm just interested why Kering is one of the companies that's really helping to lead the charge on making this campaign work, why you submitted your strategy, what you see as the benefit for the overall community of doing this.
Well, I mean, when we consider the size of the challenges that we have before us, clearly no one actor can do it. And actually, we're looking increasingly at landscape approaches. Clearly, no one actor can actually manage a landscape approach. And so what we need is the collective action. And so what I'm so grateful for in this type of campaign is to get everybody aligned behind the same words, understand how important it is. And that's the only hope that we have to start the collective action that's actually going to amplify, to have concrete progress, lasting progress, this idea of actually having traction, so we don't then just, as soon as the effort, as soon as the momentum falls, then we fall backwards. No, we need to make sure that we're actually getting traction moving forward. And that can happen thanks to this type of campaign that's getting everybody on board, not necessarily at the same pace, but all at least aligned, go behind the same North Star.
Amazing. So you mentioned momentum, and I think we'll close with this, but so there's momentum in terms of what the business community can do on its own. And then of course there's the momentum around what's going on in the broader real world, let's call it, in politics, in society, in international affairs. Lucy gave an overview of some of the stumbling blocks, let's say, the advances, the retreats that we're seeing at the moment. Just if we come back to the topic of today's webinar on COP16 and how we build that momentum towards it, just wondering what Kering is thinking in terms of contributing to the implementation of the Biodiversity Plan, what support you need from governments and other stakeholders, and if you've got any advice for the audience today.
Okay, so the main asks, I think, are pretty well identified, actually. It's so above and beyond the fact that we're all aligning within a shared framework, to actually be maybe more inventive in the way that we can finance it. Lucy just before me was talking about the financial flows, and I think that there is something really to work on there. How can we repurpose financing so that instead of the, I guess, old way of thinking was agriculture, for example, is too risky to invest in, so I'll bank on something else that's a little bit surer, to flipping it and saying, actually, my best bet, the real asset value here is actually investing in nature. And so we have to have this sort of paradigm change, and it's coming. And I'm seeing more and more actors working on that. Coming out of COP15, there was a lot of us who have been working on this idea of biodiversity certificates or credits. There are different ideas, nature value assets, how can it work? I think there's a lot of really exciting thinking going on, and we need to push through that, not get stuck in competition, but really push it forward so that it becomes something that makes sense in the real economy. So that's that part. And then my final just word, though, of what was your word? What would be my
Closing thought,
suggestion for everybody,
momentum.
my recommendation, is just never lose sight of the strategic piece. If we're going to move on this, it can't be just for compliance. That won't fit the bill. We have to understand how critical this is to move forward and understand why it behooves the business. And that is the right way to move forward.
Perfect, amazing, and aligns perfectly with recommendations of the handbook and Act E, which is that whatever happens, start with a materiality assessment.
Right.
Understand your risks and, more importantly, your dependencies. As soon as you get that, you're going to be forced to take action on nature. Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah, not forced. You're desirous. You want to do it. You will see why you want to move forward.
Compelled in a
compelled. Yes.
Good. Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thanks.
An amazing conversation. I hope everyone on the call was inspired to follow in Kering's footsteps. As I said, head to the Now for Nature website, download the handbook. That's the first step you take towards being able to submit your strategy to it and demonstrate action over the next few COPs, so that by 2030 we have thousands of businesses with their nature strategies listed on the Now for Nature campaign. With all of that, and precisely 20 minutes after I started, I'll hand back to Eva and say thanks so much to Rachel, and back over to you.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Julian. Thanks so much, Rachel. Some points in the chat also just reflecting on how inspiring, really, really fantastic. Just emphasizing this date again, the 30th of August is the deadline to submit your strategy on It's Now for Nature if you want to be part of the COP16 announcement. So just emphasizing that point. Thank you so much. And now we will move on to the final part of this webinar, which is sharing all the information and intel that we have gathered over the past months on COP16. But before we do, we'll have a look at the poll results. So let's have a look and share the results of how high COP16 is on your company radar. Fantastic to see that 3/4 of you see it as one of your priority events, or that certainly it's important and has your attention. So with that positive note, it's really my pleasure to hand over to Michael Ofosuene-Weiss, who's the Business Action Senior Manager at Business for Nature, who's going to tell you more about what to expect from COP16. This is the moment. Over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. And from what I'm seeing in the chat, this is indeed the part that many of you have been waiting for. So I won't keep you waiting much longer. But it is incredible to see the momentum that's building up for COP16, and really excited to take you through some of the logistics on the ground. So this year's COP will take place over 2 weeks, as Eva mentioned, from the 21st October to the 1st of November. We hear that around 12,000 attendees are expected from 196 countries, including representation from governments, NGOs, civil society, indigenous communities, but also business and finance. COP16 will be hosted across 2 main zones, which will take place in separate locations, so namely the blue zone and the green zone. The blue zone will be hosted in the main event center, as many of you already know, and this is where the key events such as plenary sessions, official side events, and official bilateral as well as multilateral events will take place. Access to the blue zone is limited to official delegations from member countries and accredited observers through a registration process, which I'll highlight very shortly. We also want to flag that even if you want to observe the official negotiations, even virtually, you must be registered to receive accreditation. The green zone will be outside the main conference area, and it will be designated to encourage participation of civil society, NGOs, the private sector, and other interested parties. It's open to the public, so this space will hold different dialogues and conversations at exhibitions and also commercial pavilions and many more. Over the past few months, we've been working collectively with the UN CBD Secretariat, as well as the Colombian presidency, to provide a little bit of a snapshot of the tentative calendar over the 2 weeks. As you can see on this slide, the opening ceremony will take place on Sunday, the 20th of October, and will be followed by 2 weeks of official negotiations. In parallel, There'll be 2 weeks of official side events, as well as a curated action zone, as highlighted by Bianca at the beginning of this call. This space will be to drive conversations between multi-stakeholder groups, including businesses, and we understand that there will be specific thematic days, including that for businesses. Key dates that we want you to have on your radar include the 24th and the 25th of October, when GreenBiz will host the Bloom Conference. The Bloom Conference will bring together over 200 businesses and finance leaders for interactive problem-solving discussions, and we encourage all partners and businesses to have this on their radar. Very importantly, on the 27th and 28th of October, information reaching us is that the CBD will host the Business and Biodiversity Day, as well as the Finance Day, respectively. This will then be followed up by the high-level segments with senior government representatives and business leaders on the 29th and the 30th. As you see on the screen as well, there will be a host of pavilion spaces over the 2 weeks from various stakeholders, including the GBF pavilion that Bianca highlighted at the beginning as well, where there will be different dialogues under a wide range of relevant themes. Finally, we know that there will be a whole program of activities planned for the Green Zone across the city of Cali, and we're working with partners to develop a list of business relevant events, which we will share with all of you in due time. Please note that some of the specific dates are still to be confirmed with the UN CBD. However, and this was a question that I saw in the chat earlier on, around what dates should businesses prioritize. Based on the information that we currently have, we would encourage you to look from between the 24th of October to the 30th, and we encourage you to look at these days if you're planning to join us in Cali. Now, on registration, to make it be easy for businesses and financial institutions to participate in COP, together with our partners shown on the screen here, we have developed a joint process to collect interest from businesses hoping to attend COP16, either physically or virtually. So if you're considering attending, please complete the form or scan the QR code on the page, and my colleagues will share the link in the chat. The deadline to do this for us is by the 1st of August, and this will be an opportunity for us to assist with registration. However, we just want to manage expectations and highlight a very important caveat. Completing this form does not automatically guarantee that you will receive a badge to participate in COP16, because participation will ultimately depend on the total number of allocations that we receive from the UN CBD. However, we'll do our best to ensure that all businesses are able to participate. Finally, as I draw to a close, I just want to also highlight that BFN will be a convening partner of the Bloom Conference, and we encourage all of you to request for an invitation to participate in Bloom. If you are able to request before the 16th of August, we understand that you get to enjoy a 50% discount. So this was very important for us to share with you as we encourage all of you to participate. Finally, now that you know a little bit about the on-the-ground logistics, I just wanted to give a quick recap around how you can practically support on the ground. And as you can see on the screen, first thing is to really support going into COP16, our business statement. We encourage you to deliver action through supporting It's Now for Nature and developing your nature strategies. Whilst at COP16, we encourage you to speak directly to governments and contribute to the negotiations. And of course, for those of you that will already come to COP16 with very concrete announcements, for example, if you have a nature strategy or finance to commit, we encourage you to be voice for us and speak up when you are at COP. And finally, we hope that you can join us in some of the offsite business engagements that will be hosted by Business for Nature partners in due time. So on that note, I hope we've given you a better sense of what to expect from COP16 and hopefully convinced you that there will be, of course, a strong business agenda for you to attend, and we look forward to engaging with all of you. In the meantime, if you're looking for more information, please don't hesitate to check out our dedicated COP16 webpage. And on that note, I'm happy to hand over back to you, Eva. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Michael. And thanks also to Albert for popping in the link to the website. that we have the webpage with all the most important information. So now we have a quick question for all of you, one more poll, which is, how would you like to engage ahead of COP16? There are the classical points that we've been mentioning several times now. So endorsing the COP16 business statement, I will say it once more before the end of the webinar, you can be sure about that. Submitting your strategy to It's Now for Nature, participating on the ground, making an announcement, or engaging your government representatives. So please do complete this poll. We'll come back to the results in a minute, because now this is the end of the formal part of the webinar. We wanted to make sure we covered it all within the hour, and we do have time now for some of the Q&A. There have been some really actually great questions, and what I'd like to do is split them into policy, ambition, business action, and then some of the more logistical questions. So we can stop sharing the screen right now, please, if that's okay. We've got a good question from James Griffiths about the potential backsliding or pushback, especially in the EU, for climate, nature, and people, and how we see that that might affect our agenda. And I think that for that, I would like to maybe call on Lucy to cover that one. Then I'd love for us to cover Karim Hagal's question. And I was wondering if maybe Rachel would be happy to cover that one on the role of the private sector to keep pushing for biodiversity mainstreaming and embedding the value of nature. Oh, here are the results of the poll. Is that just on my screen? But maybe let's share them. Let's share the poll results, and then I will continue to go through the comments. So can we share the results of the poll with everyone, please? Perfect. So 87% of you will say that you are planning on participating at COP16, either on the ground or virtually. That's fantastic. A third endorsing the business statement. Thank you so much. And brilliant, 37% engaging with government representatives. So we will be in touch. So thanks so much for that. We can stop sharing the poll. And I was just going through some of these key questions that are remaining. So Karim's point about valuing ecosystems, Rachel, it would be fantastic if I could come to you on that one. I can cover nature positive. And then there are a couple here, maybe for Michael on the business action side, on materiality assessment, and then examples of strategies that cover nature and climate. So let's try and cover those ones already, if that's okay. So over to you, Lucy, on the pushback. Any reactions from your side?
Yeah, thank you very much. Great question. And I think this is the new reality that we are all facing, both within the EU and beyond the EU, that has the potential to sort of shape future policies. And whilst I think, you know, that there is a tension there, I think what we have seen is that businesses fundamentally do recognize the future risks nature and biodiversity loss is posing to their business, and actually are likely to continue their efforts regardless of political shifts. And, you know, they're taking that much longer term view. Many companies have already adopted, you know, integrated climate and nature strategies, and are beginning to do so. And we're seeing that acceleration driven by that growing recognition of the importance of biodiversity and ecosystem services for their, you know, long-term resilience and profitability. So I think we remain optimistic, and I think that it's actually the reason why we need more than ever this united business voice on the issues that matter, coming to governments and also providing that really compelling economic argument to governments about why they need to you know, put in place those policies. So I think for us, I don't think it's going to change anything. I think if anything, it puts more pressure on us as a community to create that, you know, progressive and leading business voice going into these moments, calling for you know, governments to step up leadership. So I hope that helps.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Lucy. I'd be also interested to hear what others think, but let's move on to the next question from Karim on the role of mainstreaming and embedding the value. Rachel, any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, some thoughts, exactly, because I don't really know how to answer the question precisely. But what I find is, so actually what Lucy just said is that it's true. More and more of we businesses, we're realizing that we need to move forward anyway. And so we're going to do it. And the piece then that fits with what your question is is that I think as businesses move forward, governments see that it's actually something that can happen. And so then that heartens them to actually start then putting that into legislation. It's hard for them to actually make the move if they're not sure that it can work. So as we show that it works, that can really help. But then I still think that there's an engagement piece to have with them. And I think this type of campaign is precisely what we need, because even if we are able to value biodiversity, probably we're going to need both the private sector to see how they can incarnate that, but we're going to need then the political that helps structure it and format it and make it official, because otherwise we'll have these parallel systems and we'll all lose out. So I think that we also need to keep the pressure on to have that convergence. But at any rate, I think we companies, so signing on to these kinds of campaigns, plus just doing activities in terms of what is strategically important for us anyway, and that's how we'll move forward the fastest.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Yeah, I think the whole point about embedding the true value or the value of nature and people in decision making and disclosure needs to be, as you were saying also before, part of the real economy, the real financial system. And it feels sometimes like we're bringing new cards to a game that's being played and they don't quite fit. But if we have to continue using the cards and then the game will change to embed them. But we just have to keep on, because otherwise, if the rules don't change, you're absolutely right, there'll be disparate, fragmented piece of information that actually won't necessarily help reward or recognize performance beyond just environment and social. So that's really fascinating. Cool, thanks. Right, I'll do the next one and then I will open up to them Michael on strategies and Julian, if that's all right, for the materiality assessment. So on nature positive, this is a real pet topic of mine, so I'm going to have to keep it short. Greenwashing, no or yes? It all depends, because it depends how you use it. Now, nature positive is not just a buzzword, and we have to make sure it does not become a buzzword. There's a really important initiative called Nature Positive Initiative, which I would welcome you to have a look at, and I can put the website in. That really is a group of organizations from all parts of society, including a lot of academics and NGOs, that are trying to make sure that we keep the integrity of the term nature positive, which means a goal, a societal goal, to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030, so that we have more nature in 2030 than we had in 2020. Of course, a key focus of that group is around the metrics of how do we measure whether or not we have more nature in 2030 than 2020. And that looks at species, at ecosystems, at the health and the resilience and the abundance of species, etc. So there are ways to measure it, but we need to agree on that. There is a risk, and this is where in Business for Nature and our coalition, we focus on companies contributing, i.e. taking action now to contribute to that societal goal of a nature positive world by 2030, rather than saying that they are or will be nature positive. Because the focus isn't on a specific any one individual organization or person or family or country. It's about the collective. And so we should all be encouraging companies to take urgent action now to contribute to this goal. And if it's framed in that way, then it will not be greenwashing. It's very important that companies do not make claims that they cannot verify or stand behind. So I hope that answered your question, and you can tell that I could continue for hours, but I'm moderating and I should not be answering all these questions. So we're going to move on to Rodrigo. Thank you, Rodrigo Suarez, for your question on strategies. Over to you, Michael, on the net zero nature positive.
Yes, thank you very much, Eva. And the question was, do we have any good examples of nature strategies and how companies are integrating net zero and nature positive together? And I think that the simple answer is that most of the companies that are leading on nature are also the ones that are the first movers on climate, from our experience. A few years ago, we actually launched a few case studies looking at how companies are addressing nature and climate together. And there are some really good examples of companies, just to name a few, including Unilever, GSK, Mahindra, and how they are already looking at addressing climate and nature from a very strategic piece. Of course, it makes sense for any company to start by evaluating and addressing all risks, dependencies, impacts, and dependencies based on the business operations And in many cases, based on that assessment, companies realize the dependencies on climate and nature. So doing one without considering the other, in most cases, will be missing a key or critical part of your journey towards nature, given how interdependent and how critically interlinked that they are. Of course, depending on sectors within which companies find themselves to operate in, there might be some overlaps in material, climate, and nature impacts. But at the very least, we encourage that your climate strategy should speak to your nature strategy. Even if they are separate documents, they need to be working in tandem to support a nature positive and net zero future. So yeah, I think there are already some case studies that my colleague Anna has shared in the chat, building on where we started from and how companies are thinking about climate and nature. But the 5 companies that you'll see submitting their nature strategies on It's Now for Nature are all companies that are critically looking at climate and nature together.
Thanks so much, Michael. Great. And yes, with GSK, with that twin goal as well, specifically on climate and nature. So moving on, I'm going to call on Julian. You've already answered the Harriet Eilif's question in the chat, but I'd love for you to come on camera if possible. This question of, how are there requirements for how the materiality assessment is conducted for the strategies, and questions around stakeholder engagement and what happens to biodiversity when you really get all of these different inputs when you develop your materiality assessment. Thanks, Julian.
Thanks, Eva. Yeah, so apologies, it is a bit of a shameless plug, but I did go through the whole interview without talking about our work at all, so forgive me for doing it now. So basically, it's the first part of that question that we definitely have an answer for. So as I said, the handbook for the Now for Nature campaign is built around these high-level actions for business: assess, commit, transform, disclose. And so the guiding questions and the indications of the kinds of things that should be included in the the materiality assessment for a solid strategy are in the handbook as almost the first thing that you find. If you then want to understand more about how you actually conduct that materiality assessment, you can go, here's the shameless plug to WBCSD's Roadmaps to Nature Positive. I've popped the link in the answer there, where we've developed a sort of an underlying, what we call Foundations for All Business, where it just takes you step by step through these foundational activities that you need to do for a nature action journey. And the first one is a materiality assessment. Now, again, everything that is in those roadmaps is based off the ACT-E framework. And moreover, we also make sure that we're showing you that by going through these ACT-E steps, you're also basically doing what you need to do for SBTN steps 1 and 2, for TNFD's LEAP process. And so essentially, if with the first question is requirements for how materiality assessments are conducted, that's where you can go and you can be sure that following by those steps that we've laid out, you're beginning to do the right things that you need to do for all of these other things, including CSRD. Now, when it comes to the what happens with stakeholder engagement and what CSRD is asking for, that's a bit more complicated, but you can be sure that over the coming 6 months, as we get to the start of next year, when all of this really starts to hit home for the majority of companies, there'll be a raft of guidance on how to best deal with that. Just as another shameless plug, if you do want some guidance on how to think about stakeholder engagement from an action perspective rather than a disclosure perspective, then we've also just released this quite cool little piece of work called the NBS Blueprint, and it's covered to some degree in there. So I hope that's somewhat helpful, but I appreciate it's not the full answer.
Thanks so much, Julian. And I think also another piece of information and a resource to flag is, of course, our collective sector-specific actions and overviews, and we can put that in the link as well, because for 12 sectors, companies can already benefit as they're doing their materiality assessment, to look at the most typical material impacts and dependencies in their sector. So we can drop that in the chat as well. Thank you so much. I'm going to go maybe back to Rachel, if that's okay, on another anonymous question here on this tension of collective action versus your own company. And we've been hearing an assumption that companies won't want to contribute to collective action and outcomes because they can't get sufficient credit, especially when we're looking at landscape scale outcomes. I mean, it's a big topic again, and but maybe you have some reflections to share.
Yeah, great, thanks. It's actually an ongoing question, so I have the question as well, but I can absolutely share my thoughts on it. Here, we at Kering, once again, because we're really interested in the resilience piece, and we consider we can't do the resilience piece on alone, especially with agriculture. We're more interested in what the actual outcomes can be rather than the claims, because we're really doing it with a strategic approach. And that's why, for example, I was mentioning the 1 million hectares. We launched the Regenerative Fund for Nature with the Conservation International. And we don't want to keep it to ourselves. We want to see how we can amplify it. In 2023, Inditex joined us. We're hoping that more others will join us as well, because we all want to have this collective approach. And so then we can all maybe talk about the fact that we are contributing to helping transition towards regenerative these different geographies, but we'll only get it to scale if we do work together and we put aside just the compliance claims and we're actually able to really focus on what's most important. But that said, I know that that is a real concern for most companies. And so we are trying to figure it out. How do we allocate things? If we are working on the same hectares, how can we talk about it? And I have to say, and this is a question that I'll throw back out to everybody, because we don't yet know. And I worked in agriculture for many, many years. And what we know about nature is that it's not just a one deal. It's something that actually takes time to transition. And even once it's transitioned, it takes time and resources to maintain. So we need to start no longer being in this attitude of additioning, but actually talking about maintaining resilience and the ecosystemic services, the ecosystemic condition. So I think, and this goes back to the earlier question, maybe there's something to be done in terms of frameworks and with governments to actually understand that nature can't abide by the same sort of engineering rules of industry, and that we have to see how can we have other types of claims that would actually represent the way that we are maintaining these critical ecosystems.
Thank you so much, Rachel. This is really great. And I know that maybe if I can ask you to stay on, just because there's one final question, and then I see my colleagues are responding in writing to the two of the three, but the last one that's here that I do want us to cover is maybe, and it's a challenging one again, is around how are businesses actually finding or funding projects that align best with mitigating their nature risks, dependencies, strategies? What are the challenges? What have you been finding? You spoke about the fund as one option. You make the case because it's linked to your strategy. Any additional insights? Because you've already spoken about a few, but
I guess the additional insight is, what are the mechanisms that we can put in place that will actually get these things going? So my dream, for example, is to say, if we do start funding something, can we consider it more of like initiation, like seed capital, so to speak, but that where the project is already oriented so that actually the system in itself, the different stakeholders within that system are finding enough worth or value or wealth in that, so that then afterwards they're going to move forward. And so what does that mean? Let's do a quick analogy. We're talking about biodiversity. Well, probably within the types of actors that can be part of a project or a landscape needs that same kind of diversity. So oftentimes we're going to talk about finance, but within finance, there's so much diversity. So when we're thinking of a project, can we imagine who is the bank who might do the loans to the SMEs that are part of the project? Who is the other investor, private investor, who can imagine something of a more philanthropic part? Who is the impact investor who can imagine the part of helping get that factory to transform and actually create greater wealth in terms of what the farmers have been able to do? I think that what we need to do now is leverage the diversity of know-how to actually bring it together. And then we have new systems that are put in place. And that way it's not so costly for anyone, but actually we all create greater value for each and for all.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Such wise words, and this essentially a
Easy to say.
transformation of the interconnected systems that we work in. And so we need to persevere, have that diversity. There is, you know, and finance will be a big topic at COP16. So thank you so much. Well, now I'll wrap up if that's okay. So I just wanted to thank you all so much for your participation, your excellent questions. Before we close this webinar, we've already shown how you'll engage. But it's so exciting to see that many of you will be there, that many of you are, I told you I'd mention these again, prepared to endorse the COP16 business statement, joining our campaign, It's Now for Nature, by submitting your strategy, and then finally considering participating in the conference. Fantastic to see so many of you will be there. We can count on you. Please stay tuned. There is going to be a second webinar on the 18th of September. We'll have way more, hopefully, answers on some of the questions we couldn't be so specific about around the business hub agenda and where to go for what. We don't actually know that yet. We do, and we could provide you with a sense of what the agenda is looking like, which dates you should block out, and the fact that there will be so many opportunities and ways to get engaged. But on the 18th of September, save the date, because this will then go into a deeper dive of how you can concretely engage on the ground at COP16. So that's all, folks. Really hope that you enjoyed this webinar, that you found it valuable. Thanks to all of you for joining, to the speakers. And really, I think we also touched on this need in such a polarized world to come together as a group to share learnings. This is complicated stuff, but we can make it work together and reach this nature positive, net zero, equitable world that the generations to come absolutely deserve. So thank you so much. Bye for now, and please do stay in touch. Thank you.